All right, so yeah, I'm Pat Christmas, a staffer 70. Great to see everyone here this evening. This particular meeting, of course, is focused on Center City, Greater Center City. This is the 11th of 12 meetings that we've scheduled to talk about the communities, the community boundaries, and then the council district boundaries, the current ones at least that are in place here in Philly, with the idea of developing a bit of a public record here. I mean, you'll know that we're recording all these sessions so that any mappers, whether they're inside of City Hall, inside City Council, or outside, right, there'll be plenty of folks drawing maps among the general public as well. Probably not as many as we've had drawn at the state and congressional level, but some number of City Council maps drawn too, where they can get a sense about what folks think about the boundaries in a given area, right? There's no one who knows every single neighborhood in Philly, every single block. This particular initiative, of course, doesn't cover all that ground, either, but we're just doing the best we can to try to citywide, but also especially in those areas of the city where the boundaries are a little bit more likely to shift, to elevate some perspectives about what shifts would be okay, which shifts would not be okay, and then also, like in plenty of parts of the city, where people like the boundaries, like just keeping them right where they are. So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to bring up a couple slides, and then we'll jump straight into the map. Just bear with me for 1 second while I bring up just one or two slides. So again, I know with this particular group, like you all have seen these maps before, right? We had a 2001 map, which clearly had some problems with it, and cracked, essentially the Latino community in North Philly, Eastern North Philly, by running pretty deep in the Northeast and pulling into the 7th far more white voters than you would have in Eastern North Philly, in and around the Latino community. So, diluting the political power of folks in the 7th and in Eastern North Philly, but then also notably also harming basically every neighborhood, any community that was split toward the northern side of the 5th, between the 5th and the 7th there, up around the Roosevelt Boulevard, and then going all the way into the Northeast. I mean, all those neighborhoods, all those communities were harmed as well, where they were split unnecessarily. And this is where, of course, at the state and the congressional level, like partisanship is a much bigger factor for legitimate reasons, right? How the maps are drawn matter a great deal for who has power in Harrisburg, and to some extent who also will have power in the U.S. Background noise there. But here in Philly, it matters. Frankly, it matters less, right? There are more than 7 Democrats for every 1 Republican here in the city of Philadelphia. The one area of the city where this does have an impact is in the Northeast, right? Where you have a kind of a gradient from highly Democratic to a little bit more mixed to more Republican, the kind of the farther up in the Northeast you go. And of course, in the 10th district, council member Brian O'Neill has been the member there, the representative there for 40 years or so, and as a Republican. But across much of the rest of the city, it really just comes down to communities, right? Communities of interest, whether that's neighborhood, ethnic language group, business corridor, larger regions of the city count as communities as well. South Philly, West Philly, the Northwest, river wards, communities. We speak about in all sorts of different senses here. And one thing we have been stressing, like for weeks and weeks and weeks now, is that the current map is far better. Objectively, there's a bit of an eye test with these maps, and compactness is one important factor. The current districts are far more compact here than they were previously, and clearly you don't have nearly as many kind of funny jigsaw-looking features as you had in 2001. And the reason for that is because of the advocacy and the public engagement, the community engagement, again, primarily in and around the Latino community in 2011, but then also some very hard work, some very critical work inside City Council too, and especially out of Councilmember Maria Quinones Sanchez's office, who of course had a great deal at stake in trying to fix that gerrymander with her district in that particular cycle. So I go through all that just to stress that the public advocacy matters a great deal. The power in this case does reside with City Council to draw their own map. That's not the best practice. It's not the ideal, but that's the way it works right now. Ultimately what we're trying to do here is for the public priorities, the community priorities, to kind of make those as clear as possible, again, for anyone who's drawing maps outside city council, then of course anyone who's drawing maps inside of city council, to have a good clear sense of that. And then further, I mean, for council members, district members, they know very well which communities are in their districts and which ones aren't, which communities they have better relationships with, which communities they don't. But ultimately, this will come down to some amount of negotiation, and surely there have been some discussions had already, for there to be a public record of what communities want or don't want, district by district by district. I mean, that can be helpful as well when they're negotiating. So that's the overall goal here and the purpose. Of course, the question is on the other side, like, what will the map look like? Frankly, I don't think anyone's expecting a radically different map, at least in this cycle. The cores of these districts have been the same for a very, very long time. And the city has grown by about 5%. We're at about 1.6 million people now. But I don't think it's not such terrific population growth, and not so uneven that you'll have to really, really change dramatically where the lines go. But again, we will have to see what City Council introduces later in January. So I guess before I show the numbers for the districts very briefly, are there any kind of initial questions about kind of any bit of that process or the history? Again, we're going through this a bit quicker this evening than we did in some of the earlier workshops, but just wanted to pause for a minute to see if folks had any initial questions.
I had one comment, which I recognize, will not. I mean, it's not really an issue, I don't think, for anybody. But if you looked at this, if you didn't have the history of where the boundaries are, and you looked at a blank slate of the map of Philadelphia, District 4 always puzzled me as to how they put Manayunk and Overbrook together. I mean, geographically, physically, neighborhood-wise, there's really not much in common to bridge the river there. But it's been that way so long that, I don't think there's anyone really pushing to do it differently. It's just an observation of, how that came about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good one. And, actually, for what it's worth, Andrew, the 4th is one of, a bunch. These are all big districts with some very, very different communities within them. But, certainly with the 4th, it gets raised that, like, Manayunk and Roxborough are very, very different from Overbrook and some of those other neighborhoods in West Philly. And, it is I guess, and even in a sincere sense, it's challenging to represent such a big district with very different communities kind of within it. I'm pretty sure the 4th has looked more or less like that for going back even into the 60s, when of course those neighborhoods also looked very, very, very different between Manayunk, Roxborough, and Overbrook. But yeah, I hope perhaps there will be someone who'll be willing to write a book or some sort of study report about exactly how these districts have taken shape over time. I hope there won't be any fingers kind of pointed in my direction. That'll be quite an endeavor to try to uncover all the history. But yeah, it's something that, again, we're just trying to be kind of clear about the district shapes right now do seem, at least the cores. Again, the cores are pretty firm, but that certainly doesn't mean that at some point we should take more of a blank slate approach and looking at the whole city. And depending on how the city grows over the next 10 years, the population growth may kind of force us to take a harder look that way. All right, here. So we'll keep on going here. This is the only other slide I wanted to put up before we jump straight into the map. Again, I realize a couple of folks have seen these figures already, but this is really important because this shows us kind of where the pressures are on these boundaries. And in the top left-hand corner, you see the target or ideal population. You get that by taking the city's total population, right? 1.6 million people, divide that by 10. That gets you roughly 160,000. So that's the arithmetic. Very fortunately, there's about a rule of thumb here based on court precedent elsewhere that you don't have to get these districts exactly equal in population, unlike with congressional redistricting, which the understanding is that you do have to do that. We were just talking about Amanda Holt's congressional mapping plan earlier, which if we did have to do that, if the court precedent was clear on that matter, that would be a bad thing. At least we would think so, because you would end up having to sacrifice other considerations to achieve exact, population equality between the districts. You would basically have to split a whole bunch of neighborhoods, a whole bunch of communities just to achieve population equality. So it's a good thing that we have a range here to work with, and basically in the new map, the district with the fewest number of people can have no fewer than about 152,000. The district with the most people can have no more than roughly 168,000. That's about a 10% gap between the biggest district and the smallest district in the new map. And this is, again, I think generally this is a fortunate thing for us to have at the local redistricting level versus what the congressional folks got to deal with getting these things exactly equal to a T. So given that range on the right hand side of the screen, you can see we've highlighted in red and blue those 4 districts that fall either above or below that range. And I'm sure for for this group, this won't be surprising, right? The 1st and the 5th districts have experienced a good deal of growth over the past 10 years. The 1st district currently represented by Mark Squilla, right? South Philly, a lot of residents and development, and going through Center City and then up into Northern Liberties, Fishtown, Kensington, and Port Richmond, where there's also been a lot of new residents, development, and gentrification. And then in the 5th district, a similar pattern of growth, at least in parts of the 5th. And so the 1st and the 5th, because they have grown more than other districts, they will have to lose at least several thousand people apiece. And you can see next to each of the population figures, we have either gain or lose divisions. So of course, we don't redistrict person by person, property by property, or block by block. It is by voting division. And these divisions, by law can have as few as 200 registered voters and up to 1,200 registered voters. Actually, the ranges can go beyond that. And in this case, of course, we're not talking about voters. We're talking about actual people who are counted. Everyone the U.S. Census Bureau could count across the city. But the point there is that it'll be divisions themselves, which are the building blocks, and will have to be transferred from one district to another in order to achieve that population equality, at least enough of it between the districts. So the 1st has to lose divisions. The 5th, currently represented by Darrell Clark, has to lose divisions. And then the 4th and the 8th have to gain divisions. They have to pick up people. And the 4th district, which is represented by Curtis Jones Jr., the one that Andrew just mentioned, part of West Philly and then part of Northwest Philly. It actually has grown. The 4th district has grew by I believe it's roughly 3,000 or 4,000 people according to the Census Bureau over the past 10 years. I mean, surely we did miss some folks in the count, but these are the Census Bureau figures. And because it didn't grow enough, the 4th is going to have to pick up at least somewhere in the range of 5,000 people, at least enough divisions to include at least 5,000 people in this new map. And then lastly, the 8th district, currently represented by Cindy Bass, a big chunk of Northwest Philly, but then going south of the Boulevard into Tioga and Nicetown, also has to gain at least a couple thousand people. The 8th district actually shrank by about 500 people, according to the Census Bureau. Again, clearly, we always have some amount of undercount when we run a census, but those are the figures we go with. So this shows, again, which districts have to basically transfer people away and which districts have to transfer people in. And it's kind of hard to see on a static map where you can't start to manipulate the boundaries, you can't start to manipulate moving divisions around. But for those of you who haven't taken a crack at that yet, it is worth trying, because it won't simply be, let's find the 5th district has people to give away, the 8th district and 4th have people to pick up. So let's simply move people from the 5th and into the 8th, from the 5th and into the 4th. And there are a number of different reasons you may not want to do that. And one primary one is because, well, at least from our vantage point, what the communities want to see in a given part of the city, like that should be like a conversation driver and how the boundaries change. So, perhaps you can move folks from the 5th and then into the 8th in a way that folks would want to see. Maybe the folks in North Philly, like around Hunting Park, for example, would not want to see that. So when you start really kind of tinkering with the divisions around the city, you can end up with a little bit of a ripple effect. You make a little bit of adjustment on one side of a district, but that creates a bit of a pressure on the other side. And maybe once I bring up the map in a minute, I'll give like one example of how that kind of plays out. So unfortunately, there is no perfect map out there, and there never has been. There never will be. And you can't draw a map that achieves everybody's goals. But what we try to do here is try to position community perspective to be considered and incorporated to the greatest extent possible. The only other note I'll make before I kind of pause again for kind of questions and insights is that these actually hopefully will not be the final figures. So this is the straight raw Census Bureau count for each council district. This does not account for Philadelphians who are incarcerated elsewhere in Pennsylvania right now. Thousands of folks, to count them back home in their home or last known address here in Philly for the purposes of council redistricting. So this is what they're using at the state level for state house and state senate districts. They've reallocated folks back to their last home address, folks, Pennsylvanians who are currently held behind bars, at least who were held behind bars during the census count last year. And when you use that data, at least here in Philly, as you'd expect, that there's a bit of a sprinkling of all those Philadelphians who are currently held or who were held last year across all the 10 districts. It's not an even distribution of those folks, but we do still think it's important. If for a Philadelphian who's only going to be out in another part of the state for a limited amount of time, and surely they're not going to, for most folks, they're not going to be there for a full 10 years. We should be counting them back home here in Philly for the purposes of drawing our political boundaries. So that's one group of Philadelphians who do need to be out, basically added to these numbers. There's another group though that's actually already captured within these figures, and that's a bunch of folks who are included right now in the 6th district. So the city of Philadelphia has city-run jails up on State Road in the 6th district in the Northeast. Those folks were also counted in those facilities during the 2020 census. And that's not because of a decision that the city made. It's because of the way the Census Bureau counts folks in group quarters, as they're called. And there was a lot of advocacy to try to convince the Census Bureau to do that differently, but that's the way the Bureau did it. But it's still within the city's power and decision-making to reallocate those folks if they wanted to. So conceivably, and this is one of the things we're asking council to do, actually council and the county administration, is to basically pull out that at least 4,000, could be upwards of 5,000 people out of the 6th district and reallocate them back across the city, again, to their home or last known address. And this is not a physical reallocation. It's merely on paper for the purpose of drawing these boundaries. So I just wanted to point out that one other note for this group, and that these are the figures we've been flagging for weeks and weeks and weeks, but hopefully these are not like actually the final figures that council will be using. So with all of that, I just want to pause again, kind of just for a moment. Questions, comments, again, insights, especially this is with all of these meetings, they're always kind of like a hyper-informed group. So anything else that anyone wanted to add, I'd certainly welcome that.
So Pat, this is Matt Fontana.
Hey, Matt.
Kind of momentarily wearing my Center City Resident Association hat. But I guess I just wanted to, let folks know that CCRA has taken a position on the redistricting just as it affects our catchment, which is basically, like Market-ish down to South Street, River to Broad is essentially our catchment. And our position is that the 5th should extend down to Lombard, so that everything north of Lombard should be in the 5th. And that correspondingly parts of North Philadelphia, or the northern part of the 5th, should move into the 8th. And our rationale for that is that it impacts a lot of folks who live within the catchment, because block by block, you alternate between Kenyatta and Clark, and then Kenyatta and Clark, without seeming much rhyme or reason. And so when people have issues, whether it's businesses, residents, et cetera, there's always confusion as to who to go to. Our view is just picking one street and having that run east-west across the boundary makes the most sense. And our view was Lombard made the most sense there, but just for what it's worth.
Yep. Well, maybe on that note here, let me jump out of this that kind of static PowerPoint slide map and just bring up the Dave's redistricting, so we can kind of take a closer look at some of these boundaries. Bear with me for 1 second here, and then Matt, I may ask you to go through that again now that we're taking a look at the actual map. Let me just make this a little bit bigger. So for folks who haven't used this software yet, this is Dave's redistricting. It's one of the maybe the most kind of powerful, free, openly available mapping tools out there for redistricting anywhere in the country, local, state, congressional, or actually any other sort of district for that matter that has to get redrawn every 10 years. This tool can handle it. So of course, again, today we're focusing just on Center City. I'm going to zoom in again, actually. I've gotten accustomed to starting with the lens really far back and then moving in on a given area of the city. But just for folks who actually haven't taken a really close look yet at the whole map or even the Center City portion, Matt was just pointing out how some of the Center City boundaries are not intuitive. And again, like this is where I think you clearly start to see some features there where you don't understand why the boundary kind of zigs and zags the way it goes. There are some parts of the city where a line or several lines maybe folks are not big fans of, but maybe it's not there for a political reason. If I could, I'll just give a quick example of that. Going up to the near northeast, and this is where we've heard folks express concern where, Castor Avenue right here, this is a major business corridor. This is also a very, very diverse part of the city. To my understanding, like this particular intersection here between the 9th, Mr. Sherrell Parker, the 7th, Maria Sanchez, the 6th, Bobby Heenan, and then Brian O'Neill's up here in the 10th. I don't think this was drawn this way for a political reason. I think, probably most likely, the 9th has always covered this part of Oxford Circle and Lawndale, but then the 7th needed more people, so it jumped across the boulevard. The 6th needed more people, so it jumped across the boulevard. So that may not necessarily been because of a political decision, but the folks who are in around the Castor Avenue business corridor and the folks who live in this kind of larger Oxford Circle community, this makes things difficult for them, and that they got to work with multiple council offices. So, this and the same thing actually might be true as well down here. Again, I don't know exactly what the story is on this side of Roosevelt Boulevard, and on the west side, this is Harbison. But these divisions here, this may not have been some sort of political gerrymander. This may have simply been that like the 6th district, represented by Bobby Heenan here, just needed more people, so the divisions had to get added over. I don't know that for sure, but I guess I just point that out to suggest that this. I'm not sure if there's a political reason to these particular boundaries. But going back to Center City, though, where Matt was just raising, there are some not intuitive lines here between the 5th in yellow and the 2nd in green. Yeah, this is where I'm sure it has caused some confusion. And, I guess to my understanding, again, if there are other thoughts or insight on this, I'd welcome this. But, to my understanding, this was deliberately put here because there's a good deal of wealth, of course, around Rittenhouse Square, and plenty of folks who contributed to political campaigns in and around Rittenhouse Square. For whatever political reason this may be here, of course, this doesn't make a lot of sense for the surrounding community and for the residents. So, Matt, if you could again just kind of real quick for us, the CCRA is kind of proper, boundary proper. Could you just describe that again for us real quick, and then what your recommendation was?
Sure. So our catchment is basically Market,
Okay.
from River to City Hall,
Got it.
and then Lombard Street from the river to Broad Street.
Okay.
Then the group below us, Sosna, really starts at south and then moves south.
Got
And
it.
so what we've suggested in our position is that entire catchment area should become part of the 5th, right? So the yellow should move down, and then the top of the yellow, now that's outside of the map, should go to the 8th, which I believe needs people. And so the 5th would still be slightly larger because the populations you're moving are not as dense as the populations that are adding. So I'm not sure. I think the 5th is already a little over, and I think under this formulation it would stay a little over. But our view is it just makes more representation sense. And then if you try to do the other way and make the green go up, so make Kenyatta's go up to Market, you throw the 2nd way off. It's just way too hard because of the density of Graduate Hospital. Putting all of that in one district is too big. So that's the logic. At least, candidly, I did not draw anything. But we did hire somebody to do their own analysis, and I am kind of giving you the shorthand of that analysis.
Got it. And again, you mentioned to go the other way, to include to run the 2nd district boundary up how far up to Market roughly?
So if you ran the 2nd up instead of running the 5th down,
Right.
my understanding is that does further distort the second.
Yep.
And then that the second doesn't have this obvious area to give to another place.
Right.
Whereas
Right.
the fifth looks weirdly designed to begin with. And
Mhm.
we're basically, the argument is you're taking advantage of the fact that the eighth needs people. And so it's kind of a logical way to maintain geographic, consistency, right?
Mhm.
Wow. Balancing out the numbers a little bit.
Got it. And I guess if you ran, if with that formulation again, like you pointed out, that may be problematic on the other side of the district, but I guess it would have to run from along Market here to 18th, where it juts up to Arch, and it will include. I mean, I guess this is mostly commercial and government along these blocks
The
anyway.
density is going to be Market below. The real density is the down part, is the hook of the fifth. That's really where if you made that part of the second, that's where you would add a lot of density to the second.
Right. And actually, this just again, like every example that gets raised is instructive. So what Matt just pointed out here about if the second district were to pick up a bunch of folks from the northern side, that would of course impact the other parts of the second. And it is, having heard just a little bit from the Southwest, like this boundary doesn't seem to be causing a great deal of problems. I mean, it's the shapes of the divisions here do create some limitations for where we can draw the lines, but this is like probably pretty close to where there'd be a reasonable boundary between West Philly and Southwest. Southwest Philly can also be thought of as much closer up towards a little bit closer to Baltimore Ave, but that's where again you could include all of this, the rest of Kingsession and perhaps this part of Southwest Philly in the second, because that would also throw off the population figures. So there's definitely like not just a balancing act, but a real tension between what happens here in Center City, what happens here in the Southwest, and then on the other side of the second, folks down here would definitely have something to say about this boundary kind of shifting upwards or going the other way. So those points are all well taken. Matt, I guess just one more quick follow up if I could. So did you all land on Lombard also because the division boundaries kind of cleanly follow the entire run of Lombard and they don't kind of jump back and forth?
Our preference was not only is that the catchment of CCRA, but it's also the boundary of the 8th ward. We just don't think it makes sense for the 8th ward to be in two councilmanic districts. So this would place the entire 8th ward in what is now the 5th, and it allows for the entire 30th ward in all Sasna to remain in the second. It seems like a natural divide line between the two areas.
Got it. Okay. Yeah. One of the just quick observation. Then I'd love to open it up to any other thoughts and opinions that are out there here. But so you just mentioned like that would affect that would add excuse me, a bunch of folks to the 5th. There may be a portion of the 5th that could be coming off the eastern side of this little extension here. I'm sure this group knows there's a political consideration as part of this extension. The council president lives somewhere in here. I don't think on the eastern side though. I think it's kind of closer to the middle. So
he lives right where your mouse was,
like right here. Right.
My bright idea was to cut that off, but I was quickly disabused of that notion.
Well, there may be, and again, there's a little bit of a puzzle to solve here, both politically and for the on the community side. I think that not surprisingly, like the folks in Northern Liberties want to be kept whole, the folks in Fishtown want to be kept whole, and there may be like some of that can be resolved kind of in around where the council president lives. The perspectives up here, I think there are a couple different minds this way. I mean, one is that Hunting Park as kind of part of Eastern North Philly, and part of these divisions being pretty heavily Hispanic, kind of associated with the rest of the 7th district. That's where like adding the rest of Hunting Park to the 7th just may be challenging. On the other side of things, the folks in Hunting Park, Tioga, Nicetown, over to Allegheny West as well, like they work together all the time on stuff. And these are a bunch of communities that kind of work. Again, they have faced similar issues, and again, I guess this putting all these neighborhoods together, I don't think would be on the table anyway. But this will be where like hearing from the folks in Hunting Park, whether adding to the 7th or adding to the 8th, or if they want to stay put, that too, it'll be important to hear. But Matt, those points are well taken. You already kind of pointed out where achieving one objective in one part of a district will affect other parts, which is a really important thing to keep in mind. All right, that was a great, actually, that was a great place to start, especially with a very specific recommendation that we could then examine there. You folks have other thoughts or comments or questions about, again, the boundaries in and around Center City? Again, this is, Spring Garden all the way up here, kind of a firmer and straighter line, of course, but any other thoughts? Throw them in the crowd.
Pat, it's Andrew. I would surmise that, and I don't have specific knowledge of this, that there might be a tension in the first district where Mark Squilla, since if he's got to lose some areas because the population is over, he might prefer to lose in the northern part of his district that's more progressive, and the progressives in the district might prefer that he lose areas in the Pennsport area, and be able to think about challenging him in a primary. So I would imagine that there might be those kind of tensions between what he wants, what some other people want. I assume he's going to have more say about it than outsiders will.
Yeah, Andrew, like the first is a real tough one. The first is a real tough one. It's covering such a long stretch of the city and such different communities, and then it's a little ridiculous that there's a tiny little strip of land that connects the southern portion to the top portion. And it's both politically and kind of community wise, it will be I think it'll be a tough one to figure out this cycle, or even certainly like the next cycle as well. Finding, changing the southern portion, for example, like that's a tough one. There isn't a really intuitive or easy to go to boundary to kind of shift up to, right? You got the highway down here, and then the stadium's on the other side. But then, if you shift it up, you're all of a sudden cutting up Lower Moymensin and Whitman, and then there are a number of different both Latino and API communities that are in around Mifflin Sewer Park and the 7th Street corridor. So that's why even if we even if there were interest farther in the other part of the first district to kind of bump this up, unless, I don't know, even if it went way up to like Mifflin Street or something, that'd be a pretty dramatic change. But yeah, this is a tough one, and I really don't know how this is going to swing. Interestingly, hearing from some of the folks in East Kensington, they were actually seeing, at least one particular group was just fine with the first going this far up all the way up to the creek, and including most of East Kensington. The only feedback they had was that these four divisions right here, right, these should be added to the first as well, so that Kensington Ave is a nice, straight, clean boundary all the way up and down. So yeah, the first district is going to be a tough one. It's going to be a tough one to figure out.
So Pat, if I can, I'll just add that it's I'll give credit to Matt and CCRA. I agree with that 100% actually. As far as the Lombard Avenue, I've been playing around, again, not formally, not officially as part of my job, but just as Adam, citizen map maker, with the Lombard Street boundary. But I just wanted to add that seems to match some of there's been a sort of a southward movement when you're talking about some of the House and Senate districts as well on this side of Broad. I believe the 3rd senatorial under the proposed Senate map has moved a little farther south, and then it also matches, and these aren't perfect, which is why I can talk about this, because it's not individual members and it's not groups of political families, let's just say, but the 186th also moved a little south as well. So now it would match up with what else is happening from the perspective of other pieces of the redistricting puzzle. And I would also say that I think, for myself, I'd be interested in using Washington Avenue as a hard boundary. There is some bleed in the second on the east side of Washington Ave. I think we can remedy some of that, and then that makes it a little bit easier to potentially push the 2nd district into Southwest a little bit more, because I know that there are communities who are frustrated with the current boundaries, and so I think that, again, just as playing around, as you mentioned, I have a map where the second basically goes, covers everything south of Baltimore on the other side of the river, and then everything south of Lombard on our side. So I think it's feasible, but it does radically impact some other areas.
Yeah.
So I think that having the 8th ward be the boundary from the 5th and the 2nd makes some sense.
Right.
And then that also helps out some other parts of the city that, need to pick up some people as well without dramatically altering everything.
Yeah. Someone else wanted to chime in there real quick?
That's me, Shakamba.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, please. Yeah, a thought, question, comment?
Yeah. What influence, what power influence we gonna have on this redistricting that you sitting up here talking about right now? I mean, you suggesting this and suggesting that. Now, do we have any real power to influence this redistricting? And if we do, where's it coming from?
Yeah. Hey, that's a good question. That's a good question. I mean, the candid answer is like not as much power as folks outside, City Hall should. But I mean, the fact that there are opinions out here about this, and some of them will be communicated to all the city council, not just the 10, but all 17, kind of formally. I mean, we're going to kind of summarize all of the kind of the high level feedback we've gotten from all of these meetings, the survey work, speaking with civic and community leaders. That'll all kind of formally be shared with council in the first week or two of January. There are a number of groups that have been communicating directly with council members. It's frankly, it's kind of hard to say, how effective it'll all be until we see the end product on the other side. I think that's probably going to be the case whether you run this through the regular legislative process, which this goes through, which again, that's not ideal, but that's the way it works right now. And even if this were running through a more ideal process where you had kind of a separate and independent body who are drawing these lines, you don't know exactly how much of the community and public feedback is going to be considered until they actually put lines out there to take a look at. And actually, the Legislative Reapportionment Commission, the body that does the state House and state Senate districts, is maybe a good example of that. No one on the outside was really sure, where the LRC was going to go with their plans until they finally put them out there, right? And once they did that, and then I guess they have to put them out there for 30 days for public review and comment, according to the Constitution. We know that the districts they propose, again, by no means perfect, and there are plenty of folks with critiques of them. But at least from where I sit, they do seem much better than what we've had before. So, I think the short story is that when there's public engagement around this process, like there is a positive impact. It's just kind of hard to see exactly how much until a new map is put into effect. But again, it's a fair and it's a good question. Yeah. Okay. All right. Other thoughts and comments again on the Center City area in particular. I guess I suppose no one was really whether have folks either in this group or elsewhere heard of any other kind of tinkering or proposals that would change anything on the east side of City Hall, or is it primarily trying to figure out between the 5th and the 2nd kind of where this might shift around?
I can say one thing. I'm opposed to split that Washington Avenue proposal.
Oh, to move in the boundary between the 5th and the 2nd all the way to Wash Ave, you said?
Yeah, he was talking about Washington Avenue. Washington Avenue should remain within the profiles of where it's at right now. I don't see no need to divide that street.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, again, there are different perspectives on this, and there always will be. I mean, some would argue that the neighborhoods on either side of Washington Avenue, at least on the west side of Broad, are similar enough, and they should be kept whole. I think there can be an argument made that Wash Ave can be a dividing line. They're actually, interestingly, even on major thoroughfares like Washington Avenue, there are different perspectives on that. One other little example is, like, even I've heard folks make a case that South Broad, right? South Broad Street, is not necessarily a natural divider between folks on the east side of Broad Street and West South Philly, and folks on the west side of Broad Street and South Philly. But that's the boundary we've had there for a while, and that's probably one that's going to be tougher to change. But Adam, I just saw you go off mute. Did you have?
Yeah, Pat, what
Question.
was, I'm sorry, Pat, have you had the South Philly meeting yet, as far as 1-2? What was the feedback there, if you have, like, as far as like stadiums, and then those couple of precincts outside of the stadiums?
Yeah. So it was, what we heard was, and it was a pretty small group we had just the other day, but we did talk about the fact that shifting this boundary substantially north would be challenging. And one reason is when you look at certainly the like the little purple lines are the precinct or division lines. Of course, there's not a natural, at least division line wise, place to kind of move it up. And then any shift north of this boundary, you're going to be splitting the neighborhoods of Lower Moymenson or Whitman. You're going to be splitting the 7th Street business corridor, or you're going to be splitting any number of the Latino or AAPI populations that are down here. So it seemed like there was not, or at least it'd be very, very difficult to have a big change here. And then we did talk about these two divisions right here. I'll just zoom in for a second. And you can see, so Marconi Plaza straddles Broad Street. And this is where, again, I don't know exactly what the story was with these several divisions here, but there might have been a very kind of rational and public oriented bit of thinking here where, Marconi Plaza, right, is one big landmark. Let's keep that whole. This is a big athletic facility, right? The super site here, just north of Packer. Like that's the super, like the soccer field or football field, like split by division line. We'll keep the whole super site whole within the second. So that may be the reason why you have these two divisions that are part of the second instead of being part of the first. So that was the discussion on here on the southern side. I haven't heard anything really other about South Broad, except one person pointed out that, maybe in some future life we have here with the redistricting, like maybe all of South Philly will be kept whole within one district, but not a whole lot of change here. And then my understanding is that, there must be at least some folks in Hawthorne, the Hawthorne neighborhood and community that have preferred to be part of the second district. And that's why this carve out is here. That may be one that's both a community perspective and a political perspective about keeping Hawthorne as part of the second here. Although Hawthorne proper runs to like 10th, and this is another situation where like the division lines just don't allow us to have like a straight up boundary here as perhaps as we want to have. So as far as South Philly goes, that's what we've heard so far. So no bigger plans than that, or bigger recommendations or thoughts. Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, I guess here a final call here, just for the Center City conversation we're having here this evening. Already, we've got a couple really solid perspectives about the west side of Broad. But any other thoughts or comments before you wrap up? Because we're coming up on time.
I mean, is there anything to potentially? I'm sorry, I feel like I'm dominating here. Is there any potential to mirror a little bit more some of the first council with the first senatorial? I mean, they're similar. There are some very substantial differences, but it brings it a little farther. It could bring the first council manic a little farther south. Yeah, and the first senatorial, Adam, like this first senatorial includes like Girard Estates as well. Yeah.
Generally. Okay.
I mean, if it goes all the way to south, it goes all the way to Eastwick. So, I mean, it covers, right. I would say the northern boundary is a little bit more analogous, and it also, the first senatorial would also bleeds over into the west side of Broad.
Yeah.
So I'm just wondering if that's a potential, if you really wanted to dramatically change some things.
Yeah.
Adam, what's the population district difference between a council district and a senatorial district?
I mean, generally speaking, Pat should be able to speak to the current numbers, but generally you're talking 250 to 260,000 for a senatorial, and then the councilmanic are about 100,000 people less. So it would be like a dramatic. You would be moving the first councilmanic dramatically south if you wanted to incorporate some of that west side of Broad territory.
Yeah. I mean, I mean, my initial thought is like, you know, that'd be really challenging to see. Of course, this is probably part of like you know, South Broad here, where there isn't a whole lot of difference between the east side and the west side, right? You know, both a good number of white residents and a good number of API residents on both sides of Broad. And where, yeah, if Passyunk, for example, I guess was the or maybe not even Passyunk, but Snyder perhaps, to include all of Girard Estate, yeah, that would, you know, for the folks who live down here, yeah, I think they would probably be just fine with that. It'd be the other parts of the district where we'd have to figure that out and find something that everybody would agree to. Yeah. I mean, does anyone else have thoughts on that? This question has come up, like, you know, to what extent can the, you know, council and if not council and state house, council and state senate lines be more contiguous in more places? It's I mean, one of the things I've of course, like the big disclaimer I put on that is like to stress, you know, the processes through which these maps are drawn could not be more separate and like segregated between council, state, and congressional. They just could not be more separate. But no, it's a good point. It's a good point. A good question. Okay. Well, I tell you what, folks, that was an excellent discussion. I'm so, you know, glad that everyone joined us this evening. And again, just like every one of these meetings, we've gotten some good solid feedback that we'll be able to kind of distill and not just kind of have a public recording of, but write down and then submit formally to council quickly in the new year. So unless folks have any other thoughts or questions, I'm happy to sign off and bid you all a nice evening.